This is the Ridge Hunter Outdoors podcast. Hey everybody, this is episode 28. I'm Canyon Clark here with Scott Clark. Today is a special Saturday edition, we'll call it. We've got Steve Sherk back on. We're excited to have him talk about his latest article in the North American Whitetail magazine called The Target Shed. Finding your target buck sheds can help you kill them is the title on it. If you guys want some background on Steve, you can go listen to episode 19. We had him on before talking about some public land stuff and some big timber stuff, and we got into more of kind of his upbringing in the hunting world and all that and background. So if you want to listen to that, go check out episode 19, and you can get, like I said, a good background on Steve. But we'll just jump right into it here. How's it going, man?
Good. How about you guys?
Oh, we're doing all right. Getting along. Hopefully everything's going well for you since the last time we talked.
Yeah, definitely. Finding more sheds, so that's a good thing.
Good deal. I guess the snow finally getting out of there so you can find some more of them.
Yep, exactly. Although it's been snowing off and on today, luckily it's not sticking yet. So
No kidding. No kidding.
Hopefully it doesn't stay for good.
Yeah. I'd assume that makes it quite a bit easier when you don't have a foot of snow on the ground.
Absolutely. A lot easier walking, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, like I said, we're going to cover your latest article here, and I'm just going to start off with the opening paragraph, and then we'll go from there. So, reads, my obsession with monster big woods bucks in my home state of Pennsylvania has turned me into a year-round deer enthusiast. Whether it's spring, summer, fall, or winter, there's always a reason to be in the deer woods. And I actually wanted to stop right there because I think there's a good point just in that opening paragraph that if you're going to kill big deer consistently, like what we talked about the last time, you have it's a year-round thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yep. I mean, I think some hunters think that, there's just maybe fall or late summer, but there's really valuable information. I'm not even going to say during different seasons. Pretty much every month of the year, there's things that you can take, and obviously right now out there shed hunting, postseason scouting. So, like it doesn't matter what month or what time of the year it is. There's always something that you can gain while you're out there, and you can also miss out as far as like if you're not out there postseason scouting, then it's hard to make up for that, even late summer. So
Absolutely.
Missing certain periods of the year, you're definitely going to miss out on key intel and information for next season.
Yep, and I think, like you said, it's like that all year round. If you don't go out in the late winter, right postseason, you can't see that stuff you can in the late summer. And then vice versa, too. If you just go out in the late winter, but you don't go out in the late summer, you're going to miss some things there as well. But, yeah, I thought that was a really good point just right out of the bat, that to do it consistently, because that's not saying guys can't kill nice deer, because obviously people can without being there all year. But if you want to do it year after year after year, kill mature deer, you got to put the time in all year round, not just during the fall.
Absolutely. And honestly, I'd be surprised if other hunters don't just see the fun out of it. Like I'm always just anxious to hit the woods, just love being out there. So I mean, it's just that's what's great about the sport of deer hunting. Even though the hunting season's kind of short and sweet, but there's so much that you can do throughout the whole year. It really never ends.
Yeah, you can make even more out of it than what it is that short season. So, and obviously right now, and we're getting into probably the latter part of it, but we just talked to a guy 2 nights ago with Drury Outdoors. He said that they believe that probably 95% of their bucks have dropped both sides now. And
I believe that.
Yeah, we're thinking that's probably a similar number around where we're at. We had seen in the last few weeks still some bucks holding both sides, but it's not been many. So, like I said, we're kind of in the latter part of that, but also at the same time, we're at a time now for shed hunting where that if you don't find that shed, it's likely that you either just missed it or it's not dropped on your property, because it's probably dropped by now. He's probably not still carrying it. So I thought it was still appropriate timing to go over this, because it's still a good time to be out there, and it still hasn't quite greened up here yet. I know obviously it's snowing there, so you guys probably aren't there yet. But we'll get into that part of it now. So when it comes to shed hunting, I've never been a numbers guy. My goals are centered around targeting individual bucks, just like my approach to hunting them. I'm trying to learn all I can about him in hopes of collecting his antlers as soon as they drop. So that's another thing right there. A lot of guys, and it's fun to go pick up a whole bunch of sheds, but whether you're trying to make the most out of your time in the woods or get the best information out of that buck you're trying to kill, just like when you're hunting them, I think that's a really good approach to the shed hunting.
Yep. Yeah, and what I like most about it is it's almost like a practice run, or just really getting to know certain bucks better.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there's so much strategy into trying to find his antlers, and it's all related to hunting him. I mean, knowing his habits, his patterns, the areas that he goes through. And I really feel like it just brings you closer to killing that buck. And especially when you do find those sheds, then, you definitely know you're on them then.
Right.
And once again, you can use all that information towards next season as well. So that's just been something, that I've done over the years. And it's just, honestly, it's really led me to really stay on bucks, way better than what I probably ever thought I would.
Right. And, killing a big buck's a chess match, and it's just another move or another piece you've got to get to killing him if you're looking for that specific buck.
Absolutely. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to jump into the next part here. If you got more thoughts on that, though, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No,
All right.
I know we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah. So the kind of the next section here is on trail cameras, which we talk a lot about as well, how we're running them and using them at different parts of the year and when we're running them and stuff. So I'll get into that. Back to the article, it says, I use trail cameras just as much for hunting sheds as I do for hunting bucks. During the spring, the hunting season has finally ended, so the pressure of being pursued for several months has taken its toll on whitetails. If you don't play your cards right, you can bump the buck into the next zip code and likely never find his sheds. I'm not worried about scent or making a buck go nocturnal, but I want to avoid physically spooking him out of his bedding area. So you talk about using trail cameras, but at the same time, you don't want to go in there kind of similar to the season at the wrong times of day or in the wrong areas and actually physically bump that buck, while there's also the aspect you're not necessarily as worried about leaving your scent and stuff like that. So you talk about a little bit more about that, kind of expand on, using trail cameras for finding sheds and stuff like that.
Sure, yeah. Well, firstly, talking about the trail cameras, especially on public land, like, a lot of guys do wait till a little bit later to, look for sheds, but, there's more and more people doing it in this area. So I feel like if you can get a jump on, just knowing as soon as he drops his antlers, that's huge. Or there's potential squirrels or whatever chewing them up. But also, like, I really, sometimes, if you're not running cameras, you're still not getting that right intel. Is he still alive, or is he not?
Right.
Where's he been moving? Like the biggest shed I found this year, I was targeting that buck just for his sheds with trail cameras, and what I was able to do was he came by my camera with just one side, and I was able to backtrack him, and that's what led me to his shed. So just things like that. I mean, if I hadn't ran cameras in searching for that deer's shed and knowing that he dropped, like, number one, I would have never knew that exactly when he did drop, and number two is I was able to literally just get that antler by backtracking, and right. I'm guessing within an hour or less before he came by my camera, because he dropped at about 1,000 yards before he passed by my camera. I would say somewhere in that time frame, that's exactly when he dropped that one side. And then I apologize, what was some of the other things you wanted me to touch on?
Yeah, and obviously I'm jumping around a little bit here because I don't want to give up all the article and stuff. And, if anybody wants to go back, I recommend going back and reading the whole article, obviously, every time we do this. And like I said, it's in North American Whitetail. They got a great magazine they put out. And you guys can go get that. And I actually like the physical. I'm a little bit old school. I like to actually have it in my hand and read it. But they do have a digital
Yeah, me
a
too.
digital version too. So for the guys that don't want to do that, there's that option as well. So I know the magazine's kind of going downhill a little bit, but they're still catering to that digital audience as well. So there's a lot of good stuff. But back to the article here, just to kind of go over that second part. You were talking about the deer having so much pressure from the hunting season.
Oh yeah.
And you don't want to bump the buck out of that area by trying to go in and find his sheds, because then if he's still hanging on to them, you might never find him. And then you're not necessarily worried as much about your scent and stuff like you would be in the regular season, but you don't want to actually go in there and physically bump that buck out.
Yep, and the main reason why I'm just going to bring the scent game right into this is I really don't care if I make that buck go nocturnal.
Right.
I'm not hunting him. I kind of drops the antlers at night. If he's moving more at night, no big deal. So that's kind of like the main issue with the scent.
Yeah.
But bumping them is a different story, and I just have learned, especially on public land, that you're right. It's right after hunting season. These deer are worn out. They still feel pressured. They might sense that the game is over, but still, they're very, extremely on their guard, and they just don't want to be bothered this time of year.
Right.
And especially in the winter too, they move a lot less this time of year than others. So if you push a buck, he can often go to another area and just kind of settle down there and not come back. So that's where you have to be really careful.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why I like running those trail cameras, because I'll kind of cluster them in areas where, like, say if there's a food source, you can monitor that food source like crazy, and yeah, there's a decent chance he'll drop antlers where he's feeding, but most of them that I find, drop in bedding.
Right.
But those are the cameras that I'm not checking very often. But at least by watching that food source, if he's coming in there every night, then okay, all of a sudden he's just got half an antler, or hopefully you can tell if he dropped them both. But it's important to know where you can keep an eye on a deer and where you got to back off.
Yep, for sure. And that actually leads into the next section here, the bedding areas that I wanted to talk about. You say most shed hunters target food sources for sheds. Often you'll find a greater number of sheds around food sources, but not likely the biggest ones. Mature bucks spend more time on their bellies during the winter months than they do on their feet. And I think that's not only a shed hunting thing, but in season a lot of times too. You'll see those mature bucks will stay in their beds a lot longer than the younger bucks. That's why you don't see them as much in early evening or late morning. They're getting out there at night to feed, and they're not spending as much time on their feet. And then, like, especially during the winter time when they're trying to hold up and conserve energy and stuff. So you can talk a little bit about kind of your thoughts there as far as their bedding habits and all that.
Yep. Yeah, I see that most with mature bucks, and you have to factor that, mature bucks probably are doing the bulk of the breeding, so, in the rut. So they're really worn down, this time of year and throughout the winter. So obviously, their bodies are telling them, hey, you've got to rest, man, because you've got the most crucial time period of the year to get through. And often that means that, even if there is a good food source available, there's days in the winter, deep snow or just rough conditions. They're just they'll lay down all day, just for the fact that even if they do travel to go feed, they can't afford to, burn off that energy, certain days. So it's definitely a kind of a different time of year, for mature bucks. I will say that, once again, and I just kind of learned this from shed hunting, that I'll find a buck bed or even go to a known bedding area, and that's where his sheds have been. And throughout the years, it's just kind of clicked, like, this is making sense. These deer or these mature bucks, they're hardly moving at all, this time of year. I think the most of the movement, when they are moving is at night, but they're putting way more times in their bedding areas than they are, in feeding areas. So if you know the bedding and you don't pressure it And once again, using those trail cameras, if you already know, maybe he's an early drop in January or February, by all means, I have no problem going in then if my trail cameras have told me that he dropped. But if not, then I really back off and wait till March or April to go in those bedding areas.
Right. Jumping a little bit ahead here, back to the article, You say one of the biggest deer I've ever encountered was a buck named Goliath. One of the most interesting facts about Goliath was that he would winter roughly 7 miles from his summer and fall range. And that kind of made me think of, and you can tell a little bit about that specific buck if you want, but that kind of made me think of something we've talked about before, is how much emphasis do you put on where you're finding his sheds and his beds at this time of year for like the next season as far as where you're going to hunt him. So will you kind of use that intel? So like for this buck, for an example, he's 7 miles from where he is in the fall. How are you using that information, I guess, to hunt him the next year, knowing that it may not be the same place he's bedding as during the hunting season?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, every buck is a little bit different. Goliath, even more unfortunate. That pattern, that 7 mile stretch, and doing that same thing every year. I was never able to really get on him good in hunting season. Unfortunately, I could get him on camera all summer, and then I could also get him on camera, in the winter. But throughout the rut and pre-rut and all that time frame, I only ever had a couple encounters with him. And some bucks are kind of nomadic too. I can't say, I wish I could say exactly what he was doing, but I will also say, talking about other deer, that not every buck does that either, though. In fact, I think less of them have that much of a shift, from summer, fall to winter. I've killed bucks that I found sheds from in that same exact area. One thing keep in mind too is the severity of the winter.
Right.
At least around here, if it's a really bad winter, deer have particular wintering areas, like yarding areas. There's probably a good chance that if you find sheds in those areas, you're probably not on a buck's core area, but more milder winter, or if he dropped maybe like early drop, or even this time of year, the deer are starting to get out of their wintering areas.
Right.
You can still use a lot of that information, towards next hunting season. But no matter what, finding a shed is still a piece of intel, and many times it's at least got me to a starting point.
Right.
So by all means, don't just think it's a shed and forget about hunting that deer next year.
Yep. And I think another thing that probably plays into that, and you mentioned it a little bit here in the next section, so we'll jump to that, is the habitat. And going back to the article here, you say, I found that habitat is the biggest key for mature bucks during the shed season. The 3 biggest keys are food cover and low human pressure. If there's potential for severe winter weather, thermal cover is also extremely important. So, that in itself, like you just said, depending on the severity of the winter, could determine where that buck's going to be. And then, if the habitat in their fall range is good enough that they're going to want to be there in the winter still, then I think that's probably a buck that you can go in and hunt in the fall, like you were talking about, if you find a shed in there. But what role do you see? Is it similar in your opinion as far as the habitat goes, and then related to shed hunting as well?
You mean like the habitat that I brought up? Like, is that what I look for shed hunting? You mean, or similar to where they are in the fall?
Either one. So, like, what habitat are you looking at specifically for shed hunting? And then I know I got another little piece highlighted. If you cover it, I won't even go over it. But then also, how does that affect maybe how you determine whether or not you think that buck's going to be there in the fall as well?
Yep. I mean, and I probably touched on this a little bit already, but if I find sheds in I don't know what your guys' winter habitat's like, but we have like a lot of pine, hemlock, evergreen, that kind of stuff. We have mountains where generally, bucks are up higher on the mountains, but in the winter, if it's real bad, they'll get pushed down lower. So you kind of base a lot of that on, okay, if I find a shed, way down in the bottom in a patch of hemlocks, I highly doubt that's going to be where I'm going to kill that buck next season.
Right.
But I find it up, on top of a ridge, inside a clear cut, near a bed, or just around a bunch of buck sign. I think that's possibly, you could probably say bingo on that one.
Right.
But I think you kind of have to know your area and know how the deer are using those areas at different times of year. And just when you find a shed, base that find on, on the habitat that you're in. Like I said, if it seems like winter habitat, you're probably a little bit off, but
right.
You're most likely not 7 miles off. Goliath was, that's a rare deer. I'm not saying it never happens, but I would still, start to hone in on that general area,
right.
And look for, potential bedding areas, look for buck sign. I'm sure you have people, especially listening from different places throughout the country. So, everywhere is a little bit different. But if you know, what your bucks, or mature bucks are, what they look for in the fall, then I think you still use that shed as a starting point and, start scouting that area a little bit harder.
Yeah. And then one of the things that kind of ends that section that I think is applicable for us especially when we get a little bit harder winter, you say you'll also find buck beds under most of the evergreens, especially the ones on south-facing slopes. So make sure to check every evergreen and a clear cut. That's the most likely place to pick up an antler. We find that a lot around here. If you can find a good stand of even pines, evergreens, cedar trees, anything like that, especially since where we're at kind of in the Midwest, it's not like when you get out farther west where there's cedars all over the place. If you find a decent patch of cedars, there's a really good chance that's where that buck's going to be holing up for the winter.
Yeah, and that's all mainly due to wind and snowpack. Like people underestimate how cold, heavy winds in the winter really take their toll on deer.
Yeah,
and that's those evergreens. I mean, those deer get in the middle of them. It's almost like a shelter. What it really is, actually.
Yeah.
And that's just such a vital source for even a lot of different wildlife in the winter.
Yep.
And that it kind of varies. I mean, I'll find deer will bed in those areas off and on, but for the most part in the winter, wherever I see a hemlock, whether I'm shed hunting or scouting, I'm always checking it out because they seek those hemlocks and pines and all that stuff out extremely often, this time of year.
Mm-hmm. And we'll get a lot of funny looks and stuff, and a lot of guys don't like them necessarily, but if we go to a property for a consultation or something, and a guy just has no winter thermal cover like the cedars, evergreens, pines, and all that, we'll recommend a place that looks good to put some of those in because, not only if we get an early winter and it gets real cold in the hunting season, you're going to find those bucks there while you can still hunt them. But if you can hold those deer a little bit longer into the winter after the season, you got a better chance of them dropping their sheds on you like what you're talking about. And then that's just one more piece of information, especially like we've been talking about if it's that target buck.
Yep.
So, go ahead.
Yeah, and luckily, where I'm from, I hunt public land, which is just several 100,000 acres. But I can feel for people that, are on private land where, if the neighbor has the right, preferred or, a great wintering grounds, like I'm sure that can really have an effect on your shed hunting because those deer, especially in the winter, I say, even though it's more spring right now, but when I look outside and see my truck covered in snow, that's why I'm talking about winter still. But I think it can be very difficult, even more difficult, like on areas where you have more private land because deer are probably more selective about where they live in the winter this time of year than any other. And if you don't have what they need, you could lose all the deer on your property. Yeah,
their needs are not nearly as in abundance this time of year, well, in the wintertime and this time of year as they are, pretty much the whole rest of the year.
Yep, absolutely.
So the next section is mild versus severe winters, and we've talked about that a little bit, but I pulled something else out of there. You say antler shedding often can be related to stress. I've seen individual bucks drop antlers at different times of year from one year to the next. Some bucks may have rutted harder from one year to the next. That can also impact the timing of when bucks' antlers eventually fall off. So you're seeing a difference even from one specific buck to another, and maybe that's based on the winter time, or maybe that's based on how hard he rutted from one year to the next. So it's
Yep.
not, maybe that's not necessarily something you can pattern, like this deer drops his sheds every January or something. You're seeing a difference even just a specific buck to another when they're dropping their sheds.
Yep, absolutely. And see, our I don't want to say that we have horrible whitetail habitat here, but it's not. It's big woods. There's no food plots. It's kind of just up to Mother Nature to support these deer. And
Right.
and I've noticed that a lot of our bucks, a lot of our mature bucks, because they're the heavy breeders, they rarely hold on to their antlers like into March or late February. A lot of our mature bucks tend to drop like January up to mid-February, sometimes even sooner.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've always thought is, that's stress related because they're the deer, beating up on their bodies more, through the rut than any others. Because you can see many times I'll see a little 4-point or 6-point first week of April here still holding antlers, but
Right.
he didn't rut as hard as a mature 4, 5, 6-year-old.
Yeah.
And that just all boils down to stress. You can read about it. It's not just something that it's an opinion. It's a fact that the more a buck, the more stress a buck has, the more likely those antlers are going to drop off. And another thing I've noticed is I've seen, like, if we have maybe an earlier period of really bad winter, I've seen bucks just popping off like crazy, and it doesn't seem like it takes very long. As soon as those bucks start to get really stressed out, within a few weeks, those antlers start to drop.
Yeah. So that kind of leads into the closing here, learning specific bucks. So I'll read a little bit. This will be a little bit longer here just to finish it up, and then we can talk about it. So, as much as I love antlers, learning about a particular buck is far more rewarding than collecting his antlers. I killed one of my best bucks because I found one of his sheds. I got random trail camera pictures of the buck during the hunting season prior to shed hanging him. But where I found his antler was not the same area I was getting him on trail cameras. Furthermore, the ridge I found his shed on was the same ridge where I killed him that following season. Had I not found that shed, I guarantee you I would never have killed that buck. So I'm assuming you remember that specific buck, so maybe you can talk a little bit about him and maybe finding that shed and then how you use that to kill him the next year.
Yep, yeah, it was a big 10-point I shot, and the season before, I just had a couple random pictures of this deer at night. Didn't really know that much about it, and just kind of one of those things like you get a picture and you say, I wonder where that deer is coming from. And I can't say when I was shed hunting I was specifically looking for that deer. I was just going through an area, a little mix of postseason scouting, and if I find a shed, that would be great too. Kind of doing two things at once.
Right.
But I found that deer shed, and like that's when the light bulb came on. It's like a mile or two away from where I got those random pictures of him.
Yeah.
And it just I saw a big buck sign in there. Everything I saw was kind of pointing me to like, okay, this is where this deer was hanging. It was a mild winter that year, which also told me that there's a good chance that deer just kind of hung around. He didn't have to shift into like a more conducive, like wintering type habitat. So I went right in there the next year and started to get pictures of him, and everything just kind of clicked. And it was actually in New York where I hunt New York, but the first day of New York gun season, I killed that buck on the first day. So right exactly, maybe not exactly where I found the shed, but within several hundred yards on the same ridge. So that, if it wasn't for that shed and finding that shed and also like kind of doing a thorough walkthrough of the area, like picking up, could this possibly be where, where this buck's hanging. Because if you just find a shed and throw it in your pack and go home, once, like I said earlier, you find a shed antler of a deer that you're interested in, immediately that's when you want to start to do some extra scouting, and that's what I did, and that's how I killed them.
Yep. And then you kind of wrap it all up here. It says, if you're a mature buck hunter, I encourage you to put in greater focus on shed hunting individual bucks. In the end, you'll gain way more than just a set of antlers. And I think that's the biggest key, and talked about it kind of in the opening. If you're looking to kill mature deer and you're wanting to do it consistently, it's year-round, and you can go in there, and you're just like you're targeting that specific buck during the hunting season, target that dude in the shed season too. And then, like you just said, once you do find his sheds, then you know, okay, I can go in here and do more intense scouting. And then, you've used your time more efficiently as well while you're out there in the woods.
Yep. And I don't mean, I'm not talking on shed hunters. I think the guys that are into just getting numbers of them, I think that's just as cool. But I really think you're going to get way further ahead focusing your shed hunting, more on individual bucks, because you're gonna replay through your mind how you shed hunted that deer, going into the next hunting season. There's going to be a lot of information even before you find that shed. You're probably going to be finding sign and beds and trails. It's almost like you spent another whole season hunting him, and all that information, whether it's that you found leading up to finding the shed and even going back after, all that time and effort and all that information. There's just so much that you can collect that honestly, it really, going into the next season, really definitely puts you way ahead of the game. And if by all means, I know several deer that I've killed. Had I not have done that, I never would have killed them.
Yeah, for sure. And we talk about this a lot too. If you're one of those guys that just wants to find a bunch of sheds, that's cool, man. If you're one of those guys that's just out there and you want to kill a young buck, I'm not knocking anybody's way of hunting. But if you're trying to, and we talk about, that's kind of the stuff we go over in the podcast, we're trying to kill mature bucks. Depending on where you're at, now there's places where it's hard to kill a 2.5 or 3.5-year-old buck, and I get that. But especially where we're at in the Midwest, even out farther west, like in Kansas, some parts of Oklahoma, it's easy to, I don't want to say easy, but it's a lot easier to kill a 2.5, 3.5-year-old buck than it is 4, 5, 6-year-old deer.
Oh, yeah, I don't care where you're from.
Yeah. So if you're trying to kill 4, 5, and 6-year-old deer, this is the kind of stuff you got to focus on.
Absolutely. Nope, I couldn't agree more.
Yep. So, you got any questions for Steve or anything before we let him go?
No, I'm just soaking this all in.
Okay. Just taking in the information. You've been quiet over there. But yeah, no, Steve, I think what you're doing out there on public ground is really impressive, man, and it's really cool. I enjoy following you on social media and stuff. And before I forget about it, where can guys follow you at, like on social? I know I got you on Instagram. You get a lot of good stuff there, but
you obviously, like you said, Instagram, Sherk's Guide Service. It's SHERKS Guide Service, or on Facebook, obviously too. And I have a website, SherksGuideService.com. Feel free if you're someone that's never followed me, or shoot me a message. I love, like I've said before, I love just meeting different people throughout the country. It's really, it's being a hunting guide and just being in this business, like it's opened so many doors and avenues for me and led me to so many great people that, I'm just having a blast doing it, and appreciate everyone that follows me, and even you guys just get me on here and talking hunting with me. It just makes my life much better.
Yeah, man, absolutely, and we love having you on. And if you want, man, you can go ahead and plug the business a little bit, the guide service out there, a little bit of what you do, and if guys want to come out and be a part of that, how can they do that?
Yeah, well, once again, just find me on social media or on my website. And I will say, though, this next season I'm already fully booked, but generally I book most of my hunts usually it's just a short window, but
Mm-hmm.
the last week of December to the first couple weeks of January. I'm just a small outfitter. I mean, I'm not taking hundreds of clients. So
Right.
I also have a lot of guys that just keep coming back every year, and those are the ones that get the first chance to rebook. But
Oh yeah.
most people, if you get in contact with me around the new year, I'll always have at least enough openings to get just about anyone in that would want to do a hunt with us.
Cool, man. So, yeah, that's good that you already got everything booked up. I guess that's a good problem to have. So,
Yeah, completely. So
Yep.
I'm very fortunate.
yep. Hey, man, we appreciate you coming on. And anytime you want to come back, just give me a holler and we'll make space for you. Thanks again and take it easy.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. You guys have a great weekend.
You too, Steve.
Yep.
Bye.
So that was Steve Sherk, again, of Sherk's Guide Service. And obviously he's a writer for North American Whitetail. We've done a few of his articles now. Always a great guest to have on, full of good information. Hopefully you guys can use that information for shed hunting. I know that kind of changes in a little bit of the way, I'm going to specifically be more towards the bedding areas. And you see a lot of guys focusing on food more than the bedding, like he was talking about. And if you get to thinking about it, like he said in there, the mature bucks are going to spend most of their time in the bedding, especially if it's a harsh winter. But just in general anyway, more mature bucks are going to be in their bedding area. So you got any thoughts on anything Steve had to say or the article before we wrap it up?
The takeaway that I have from it is you see these guys, if you want to be one of those guys that just walks around and finds a shed, throws them in the box in the corner or makes a chandelier or whatever, that's cool. Nothing wrong with that. But if you're one of those guys that wants to keep killing mature bucks year in and year out, or at least having opportunities, it's the same way with what Forrest was talking about on the last cast. It's the time that these guys are spending and the effort they're putting into it. And you can't just go out in our case, October was when bow hunting starts. You can't go out in the second week in September, spend 30 minutes walking the property, doing a little scouting, throw up a stand on Wednesday, and then go hunting on Thursday or next Monday in October, and continue to kill big buck. Now, you might kill big buck accidentally. One walks by and shazam, there it is. But that's not gonna happen every year, or at least you're not going to get that opportunity every year unless you put in the time. And not only time, it's year-round time.
Yeah.
It's food plot time. It's camera time. It's shed hunting time. It's hunting time. It's scouting. It's observation when you're hunting, and all. It's practically a year-round effort. So if you want to be one of those guys, you have to be committed like those guys are.
Yep. And the old saying, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then. You can kill a mature buck one out of every 4 years, depending on where you're at. Maybe there's a lot of good mature bucks in your area, so you're going to have more luck with that. But if you want to do it consistently, like you're saying, like he was saying, you got to put in that time.
You talk to the guys that got the wall hangers, and I mean,
year after year,
or
killing
at least
one, even 2
opportunities.
bucks. Yeah.
What are they doing? That's what they do in their spare time. I mean, it's a hobby that they love, but they're spending just as much time at that hobby as they are at their work.
Yeah.
Most of them. So.
Yep. I think that's a good place to wrap it up for this podcast. Obviously, if you guys want to support, you can go to ridgehunteroutdoors.com, pick up some food plot seed, anything else you need, we got on there. If you don't see what you need, just send me a message. If you guys ever have any questions for us you want us to answer on the podcast, send us a message there. We're at Ridge Hunter OD on Instagram, Ridge Hunter Outdoors on Facebook. You guys can follow us there too. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Spotify, and then you can also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, good or bad. We can take it 1 star, 5 stars, however you want to do it. So we appreciate y'all listening to this special Saturday edition, and we'll be back again next Friday. So thanks, and we'll catch you then.